Okay, we're gonna just go a step back. We're gonna go a step back to the Mishnah. Hey, Barbara, hold on a second. We're gonna go back a second to the Mishnah to just recap for a second. So we're on page 6, Vav Amud Beis 6b. So we'll go, we only did the Mishnah, a little bit of the Gemara. The thing is that there's a lot of halachas. Before we decided to learn Megillah, I consulted to a friend of mine who runs a very successful top 10 Daf Yomi class over here in Eretz Yisrael. He was rated in the top 10 Daf Yomi classes worldwide. So he said, "Oh man, do you teach Megillah? It's a light Masechta. It's an easy Masechta." He thought I could have picked something a little more challenging. It turns out that actually Megillah is a very challenging Masechta to teach because it's halacha l'maisa, it's the actual law. And so you can't just, you have to make sure you have the accurate information, and there's a lot of information and questions to understand how to, the halachas itself, at least so far. At least that's what I'm finding. So let's just go back to the Mishnah. Again, we know that there's a leap year. Now we don't have to, the Chachamim, like we learned in Rosh Hashanah, don't have to leap the year like we spoke last week, as Shuki pointed out. We don't have to leap it in the month of Adar. The rabbis, the Sanhedrin could already figure out at any point that they have to leap the year based on the criteria and information that we use to leap the year. And there's a system that's used, as we learned in Rosh Hashanah. What are those criteria we need to decide to leap the year or not? And some of them we know earlier, and some of them we have to wait, depending on the time. How many sacrifices, if there's sacrifices, if the rain. There's a lot of things that we take into account. But certain things we know earlier on. So it doesn't have to be that they leap the month or the year and add the 13th month in the 12th month. You could do it already from Tishrei time, which is the Chodesh Hashvi, the 7th month, counting from Nisan, the 1st month. So already 4 or 5 months before, the rabbis could have decided that this is going to be a leap year, and based on that, so we know already going in that there's going to be 2 Adars. The question is if they don't know, and the halacha also is they could leap it until the end of the Adar. It means you could go the whole Adar, meaning to say you do Purim and all that, and you're about to go into Nisan, 2 weeks away from Pesach, and all of a sudden they decide that the rabbis say no, we need more time for the month of Adar. So based on that, there's a lot of questions in our Mishnah of how we deal with it when we know before, when we know during, when we know after. So this is where our Mishnah comes into play. Why do we leap Adar? Not just to make things more simple. Just let's find a month that has less holidays in it. We could do Shvat. Let's say Shvat, although it has Tu B'Shvat. But Shvat, we could do a month that has maybe possibly a little bit less holidays, and there's less confusion. Give us more time. So the reason why we leap the month of Adar is brought down in two reasons. One is because in the Megillah it says that about the Purim, Chodesh Sheimasaru Chodesh Adar, that the 12th month, which is Adar. So it's clearly that the 12th month has to be Adar. So if you're going to make 2 Shvats, then you're going to have the 12th month being 11th month being Shvat, the 12th month being Shvat, and then the 13th month being Adar. So the very fact that the Megillah says Chodesh Shneimasar or Chodesh Adar means that it always has to be the 12th month Adar. The only thing is you can make the 13th also Adar, but at least the 12th has to be Adar. That's one reason. The second reason given is that we learn it from the end of the month, just like a month that has an extra day. It's the last day that's extra, not the, so too the month it's the last month. The third reason is more Kabbalistic, brought down that in the each one of the 12 months correspond to one of the 12 tribes, the 12 Shvatim. So the month of Adar is corresponding to Yosef. It's Mazel Dagim, which is Yosef Tzaddik. Yosef had 2 sons that became tribes, Menashe and Ephraim. So it would make sense that his tribe would be the one that's 2, his month would be the one that's 2, which is Adar. Okay, so Adar is the one that has to be leaped. It has to be leaped. So therefore, it leaves a lot of room for confusion. And the confusion could be is when in the days when we didn't have a set calendar, and so how do you go about Purim? You don't know what this year is going to be, even if you think it might be leaped. So that's where our Mishnah comes in. If you read the Megillah in the first Adar. The question is it the first Adar knowing it was the first Adar, or we went into the first Adar thinking that was the only Adar? So clearly, V'nisab Shana means from the plain text that they leaped afterwards. It means they thought this was going to be a year of 12 years. They added the 13th month. So now what do? We read the Megillah. Did we fulfill our obligations for Purim? You have to read it again for the second Adar. Means doesn't, even though you read it in the first Adar and you didn't read it, so to say, intentionally. You read it because you thought that was the Purim. And then the Mishnah says a statement: that there's no difference between the first Adar and the second Adar. Means that either you don't have to celebrate Purim for other than mitzvahs of the first Adar. In the second Adar, if you already did in the first Adar, seemingly, because the only thing that we have to do in the second Adar is read the Megillah and give the gifts to the poor. That's what our Mishnah says. The questions that we're going to go into is who's the opinion of our Mishnah, and that's what we're holding now, really. So Rashi says, "Elam mikra Megillah klei mashim asin berisha nayatza." What does it mean? So Rashi says, what does it mean that there is no difference? That you can't fulfill your mitzvah if you already read the Megillah in the first month, because you have to read it again in the second month. That's what it means. Ein bein Adar Rishon, ein Adar Sheni. Again, we talked about the Suda. The halacha is the Ma'isa, as we're going to see in Tosfos. The halacha is the Ma'isa that we don't do anything really. That we have today, Purim Katan. The only thing that we don't do is we don't say Tafnan, and we don't, evidently, it seems like, according to most opinions, we don't fast or do tightness. The question is, again, the footnote that I got stuck on last week after examining a little more in the detail in the text, and I sent it to the Steinsaltz Institute, is a wrong footnote. That's why it was confusing. But let's go quickly through this footnote. Some say that the halacha applies only when the year was leaped after the Megillah was already read. So this is the footnote so this footnote, you have to, the writing on this the text on this footnote is off. So, or even more so, if when in advance that there will be another month. Some was only when the leap year was leaped after the Megillah is already read, or the more so if it was known in advance that there will be another month of Adar, that they mistakenly read the Megillah in the first Adars. Again, that the Ritva, that they got the Ritva wrong. Basically, the Ritva is saying is that this applies both in the case where they knew before or they didn't know before. It doesn't make a difference. If you read the Megillah in the first month, you didn't fulfill your obligation, you have to read it again in the second month. The Rosh is also off. The Rosh rules that the 14th and 15th of the first fast of Adar are days on which eulogy and fasting are prohibited. Only in the case where the Megillah was read on those days before the year was leaped. What does that mean? That also doesn't make sense, because the Rosh is saying if you didn't know that if it wasn't leaped, then you thought that was Purim. Of course, you can't fast. If you get on regular Purim, you can't fast and eulogize. So if you didn't know that the year is going to be passed over, is going to be leaped, of course it's that then you don't fast, then you don't say eulogies. And if you didn't, and if it's the first Adar, meaning you leaped it already, so again, then we say there is no law. What do you mean in the case where the Megillah was read? So the actual language of the Rosh is what happens if you leap the year on Purim, meaning you read the Megillah. And middle of Purim itself, they decided to leap the year. So can you fast on that day? Do you know that that's not going to be Purim? Because next year they added today another month. So there the Rosh says only in that case you don't fast on Purim Katan. Okay, if they don't leap the year, so obviously you can't fast because you don't know that's going to be only one Purim. So you do all the laws of Purim. That's a no-brainer. If they leaped it before, the Rosh says, if they leaped it before, then the first Purim means nothing. And even fasting is not a prohibition on the day of Purim. So what is the Rosh talking about in the event where there's a suffix, a doubt? where we would say that even though it's the first Purim, you still can't fast, would only be in the case where you leaped it on the Purim itself. So if you leaped it on the Purim itself, now you know, you read the Megillah already at night, now you know that there's going to be another Purim. Can I fast? No. Because since you already did some of them in Hagim of Purim, you shouldn't fast. That's what the Rosh learns. It's obviously a very single opinion. Okay. If the people read the Megillah, the first Adar was intercalated, however you pronounce it, they read it again during the second Adar. That's the Pesach of the Torah. The question that the people have on the Torah is that the Torah also learns like those who say that it's only in the case where you didn't know. And that means in our case, in the case of the calendar, where we do know, so basically the Torah is not talking halacha l'maisa. Okay, should I bring down one, then we'll go further. Okay, the Gemara continues. Now the Gemara goes, well, how do we even say the parashas? What about the other? So the Mishnah, our Mishnah says basically that if you did the first Purim and then you leap it, like the Ritva says, it was only afterwards. So then you have to do the Megillah Matanos Lavyonim again. We have two mitzvahs that the Mishnah says are not, you have not fulfilled the obligation, although you kept Purim according to what you understood you should keep it. What about the four readings, which we have the four parashas that are Shkalim, Zachar, Para, and Chodesh that we read around Purim, two before and two after. So how do we say the parashas? Either it doesn't make a difference if it's the first month or the second month. That's a simple explanation. Like we learned last week, Gemara says, say the parashas Shkalim, Zachar, Para, Chodesh, the Tanam Masisim, Bnei Ir, Noigim, Ba'adar, that we do this on. We read these four parashas, especially around the month of Adar. Meaning to say that Rashi, from the simple explanation of Rashi, is if for whatever reason, it's not important what the reason is. If you read it in the first Adar, you've already fulfilled the obligations. You don't have to read in the second Adar. Rashi Tosfos says, let me say the parashas only in case you didn't know that we're leaping it. Only afterwards, so to say, at the end, they leaped the year. Then you don't have to read another sheni. But if they leaped it previous and you knew when you decided to read it in the first Adar, then seemingly from Tosfos that doesn't help. It only helps in the case where you didn't know. And if you didn't know, so you read it the first parashas, your yotzah. Okay, this is where we left off last week. Again, the Rosh, what seems from the opinion of the Rosh Rabbeinu Asher, which is the son of the Torah, the father of the Torah. So the Rosh writes that the Rosh is of the opinion, obviously, that other Rishon has no significance, and even the fasting, which is the one thing like basically fasting goes together with not saying Tachnun, right? That is our halacha. We don't say Tachnun on because we killed the opinion that fasting and kindness and eulogy and kindness is not done on even Purim Katan on the first Purim, even if we know the calendar. Like today we have a calendar. The Rosh says no. If you know that Purim is coming up, then there's no celebration. There's nothing to remember Purim on the first Adar. And the only case you can't fast is if they leap it on the actual day of Purim itself. So the Rosh is also the opinion that even about the four parashas, that if they leaped it earlier and you read it in the first month, you have to read it again in the second month. And the same thing he says about the Hesped and Tanis, like I said before. That's only it's only on the second month. And therefore becomes very complicated because that's what the Torah writes. The Torah basically writes, and that's his son, which is the basis of the Beis Yosef, which the Beis Yosef uses the Torah as his formula to put together the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of the Jewish law, says that doesn't make sense. Why would the Torah bring it down in a book of halacha, where the Rosh is talking according to the times of the Gemara? When there was a possibility we would not leap the year, we wouldn't know. We don't have a set calendar. But today that we have a set calendar, according to the Rosh, if the Torah brings down his father, there is no scenario that there's ever a doubt of when there's a leap year, because we have a preset calendar till Mashiach comes. So if that's the case, so there's so what's this scenario that you wouldn't say Tachnun? Because so therefore you always say Tachnun on Purim Katan. You can never read the 4 parshas in the first month. So he brings down. Again, this is a large discussion. He brings down the opinions that say maybe there's the villages that don't have calendars. So what happens if they didn't have a calendar and they found out that they made a mistake and there's a leap year? But there's a lot of issue with that, because how could we have laws based on situations where it's a lack of knowledge based on the information's there? It's not like we don't have the information. In a regular case, we don't have the information. To say that big groups of people made mistakes is not tzibur shitara is not likely. All right, there's a long discussion about that, but let's go forward. All right, now we want to figure out, the Gemara wants to say, sorry for the preview, to put 50 minutes of the last class. Now we're going forward. Who's our Mishnah like? Our Mishnah says that Megillah and gifts to the poor have to be done in the second Adar no matter what. Lay Tanakama, our Mishnah can't go according to the Tanakama. We'll see what that means. The unnamed opinion. Lay Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi, not according to the opinion of Rabbi Lezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, or in the name of Rabbi Yossi. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and not according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. What are we talking about? The Talmud, we learned in the Brisa. Call us a Megillah ba'adar rishon is Adar I. Okay, here it's more clear. You've read the Megillah in the first Adar, thinking it will be Purim, and then we leap the year. I said by the Shem, you have to read again the Megillah. Hold on, Aaron. We have to read again the Megillah on the second Adar. Shekol mitzvahs. Because according to this opening opinion, whatever we do in the first Adar, in the first Purim, we would do in the second Purim. Whatever we do in the second Purim, we do in the first Purim. Besides Megillah, we can't fulfill our obligation in the first month. We have to read it again. That's the opinion of Tanakama. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Lezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi says, we don't have to read it in the second Adar. He says all the mitzvahs can be done in the first month. Seemingly, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi we can learn in 2 ways. One is in the case that we did it by mistake, meaning not by mistake because we didn't know we're leaping the year, or even when do we celebrate when do we celebrate Purim? Is it the first Adar or the second Adar? Who says that the primary month is the second month? Maybe the primary month is the first month, and the secondary month is the second month. Therefore, Purim is celebrated in its full in the first month of Adar. That's the second opinion. So that's obviously not our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says in the name of Rabbi Yossi, seemingly it's the same Rabbi Yossi as the father of Rabbi Eliezer, that Af Koyra said by the Sheni, that we also read the Megillah in the second Adar. Shekol mitzvahs shenoigis b'sheni ein noigis b'rishon v'shaven behefsid b'tayim shesrum zebezeh bezeh. So this is where we have the problem. This is where the Rosh becomes a little complicated. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says in the name of Rabbi Yossi that if you read it, that you also read the Megillah on the second month, because all the mitzvahs of Purim have to be done in the second month. So the first opinion is everything be done in the first month besides the Megillah. Rabbi Shimon says everything has to be done on the second month. Everything has to be done in the second month. The only thing that can be done in the first month is which is really the halacha. The halacha seemingly is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, which we don't do hesper and tainus, we don't eulogize, we don't fast, and therefore we don't say tachnun. And like the Ramah only finishes off the Taiv Lev Mishnah Tamid that a Suda is a suffix. We don't know if we have to do a Suda, if we have to Marbim B'Simcha on other cut. And he says, you can always be happy. It's better Taiv Lev, a happy heart is always joyful. Yes, Aaron.
Okay. Now I don't not distinguish between which opinion. I'm making this flat out for both opinions. You did it, and now you didn't realize your mistake for a whole month because you didn't know that it was a leap year. So for the leap, you thought it was a regular year. So now a whole month went by, and you thought it was not the second same month. You thought it was a totally new month. For a whole month, what happens?
No, so again, this is we were talking a little off the Mishnah itself. Our Talmud is talking about where it's not a question of knowing or not knowing. The rabbis haven't yet decided to make it a leap year. So the rabbis have until the end of the other month to decide, based on the criteria of what the information that they use to decide, to leap the year. So going into the month of Adar, all Klal Yisrael, there was no people that didn't think that today was Purim. They thought today's Purim because we don't know otherwise. They thought maybe they could have thought that possibly it won't be Purim because the signs are there for them to leap the year. Obviously, they don't do it out of the blue. But until the Nasi paskins that it has to be a leap year, it's a regular Adar. So therefore, you do everything. That's not a question. The question is, today that we have a calendar, and we have clearly, you open up the calendar, you get a calendar from your shul. It says clearly this year is leap. No. Now, what happens if you don't have a calendar and you're just not informed? You don't go to shul, and you don't like those people want to answer the Torah. The Torah brings down your question. Because he brings down the halacha, the law, and in the law we're talking about in our present situation where we have a calendar, and therefore this is a big challenge. Wondering why we're even talking about this when it comes to the law. Everyone knows it's a leap year, and he says maybe you're not know. Like you said, maybe I don't know. So in that case, if you don't know, so then we have to check the law. The cases of not knowing, some people say, is like in the case of a leap year, and then we have to then you have to wonder if you did certain things, you have to do it again. Certain things you don't have to do again. And the question is, if you read if you're read the four parshas, or if did you have to, eulogizing. What happens if you're in the middle of a eulogy and someone runs in and says, "Oh, this is a leap year, by the way, so you can't eulogize today." But I don't know. There's different scenarios where if a person doesn't know, most people don't want to accept that. The Bach, the Beis Yosef himself challenges the Torah to say that we can't have laws around an individual who doesn't have the information. But if you want to ask me halacha l'maisa, the actual law, if you run and you had a gathering in your home and celebrate Purim in the first month, and then you realize that there's a leap year, for whatever reason you're off the grid and you didn't know there's a leap year, so you celebrated it again. Okay. So now we have three opinions. We have the opinion of the Tanna Kama that says that the only thing that is significant about the second month is the Megillah. We have Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi, who says the second month is the primary month. The first month is the primary month, seemingly. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, also in the name of Rabbi Yossi, that we read again Megillah. His language again is challenging. It says af. The means also we have to read in the second month. Why? Because everything has to be done in the second month. Means all the halachas of Purim have to be done in the second month, even if you did it in the first month. The only thing is that everyone agrees that we don't fast and we don't have eulogy. Again, based on Rishavin means everyone agrees. Meaning to say, Rishavin means not everyone agrees. Rishavin means that both months are equal, and the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. So that would the rush that says that's only talking about a case where they leaped it during the actual Purim is a very challenge, because if we paskin, if the law is according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and he says that both months initially you do not do hesper and kindness, and the Rosh says that when we move in the case, that in the case where we knew that there's 2 months, but only in the case where we leaped it. So what's the possibility of having a situation where there's you move the eulogy but you can't, is only if they leaped it on the day of Purim. Otherwise, if it was leaped before, then that's not what we're talking about. And if it's leaped afterwards, then of course you couldn't eulogize because you didn't know that it's Purim. So the psak of the Rosh seems very challenging, because the possibility for the Sanhedrin to find no other time to leap the year than the middle of Purim itself seems a little bit, the odds of that happening seem small. Okay, so Rashi says that initially that we do not eulogize or fast on Purim Rishon or Purim Sheni, Purim Katan or Purim Gadol, which is the halacha. We don't say tachna. Okay, so now the first thing Gemara says like this. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Tanna Kama. Seemingly, what's the difference between Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Tanna Kama? Both of them say you have to read the Megillah again. Some Rabbi Papa says say the Parshas Gemara. What about the reading of the 4 portions? The Tanna Kama says that you have to read it on the second month. The Ovid Berishim, but if you read it in the first month, it means they leaped afterwards. Ovid, so then it's ready. Come to again is the Megillah. Sorry, the only thing you have to do again is the Megillah. The Afagav, the Karbarishan, you have to read it again. Again, we have other mitzvahs of Purim We have Matanas Lavyonim, gifts to the poor, Sudas Purim, Simcha, Mishalach Manas, etc. So, but we're not talking. So far, the only thing that we have outside of that is Matanas Lavyonim mentioned in our Mishnah. We haven't mentioned Matanas Lavyonim. We don't mention any other mitzvahs of Purim in this brisa. So we're trying to figure out first what's the difference between, because we could have just said clearly, I mean, just to jump ahead, we could have just said what the difference between Reb Shimon ben Gamliel and the Tanna Kama is Matanas Lavyonim, right? Our Mishnah says that you have to do Matanas Lavyonim again. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says everything has to be done again. Our Tanna Kama, the Tanna Kama of the brisa only says Megillah has to be done again. So why would we even think that the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel are the same opinion? So and he could have answered, seemingly he could have answered Matanas Lavyonim or other mitzvahs. He answered only the 4 parshas, and I'm not sure why. So, but he says that the 4 parshas, according to the Tanna Kama, if you read it for whatever reason, they leaped the year, and you read it, so then it's read, and then you just move on. According to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, you have to read it again. For Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi Savar, afilu mikra Megillah chatchila b'rishon. That if you read it in the first month and you did it initially like that, it's okay, because who says the primary month is the second month? But Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, "Afilu say the parshas ikar b'rishon, ikar b'sheni." Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that no, you have to repeat the 4 parshas. So we have 3 opinions. We have the opinion of the Tanna Kama, the brisa, which the only thing that has to be done the second time is the Megillah. He could have mentioned the other mitzvahs, but he doesn't. According to Rabbi Lezer ben Rabbi Yossi, he says the primary month is the first month, so therefore you celebrated Purim. That's what you did. You did the right thing. It's fine. And according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, you would also have to read the 4 parshas again. Doesn't mention anything so far about the other mitzvahs of Purim. There's a lot of discussion again. It's not so really halacha l'maisa, because at the end of the day, we have calendars. But the question is again, if according to the Tanna Kama, if they leap the year before, means this challenge of this Mishnah is that at what point did they leap the year? And at what point are we talking these discussions? Are we talking about the discussion when they leap the year at the end of the month? Or if they leap the year in Shvat, Kislev, whatever, before the month? It's not the same thing. Meaning, if you celebrate Purim, even Rabbi Lezer ben Rabbi Yossi doesn't say anywhere that he's talking about a case where they leaped it in Shvat. Then the Gemara says, L'chatchila b'rishon. So that we could say that L'chatchila b'rishon, but we could also learn Rabbi Lezer ben Rabbi Yossi says, no, if you know it's 2 months, you read it in the second month. If you don't know and you read in the first month, then you're Yaitza. The Gemara takes on to understand that he means L'chatchila. He means to say that what is the primary month is the first month. And we're going to see why. We have an argument why, but it's not 100% clear from the actual brisa itself that that's what he means. And the same thing about the arguments of the parshas. Does the Tanna Kama hold that if you read the parshas, if it was leaped before, that it's still considered okay? Or only in the case where you read it and you didn't, and it was leaped afterwards? And the difference is, okay, he says you read it. Whereas if Shimon Gamliel says, no, you have to read it again. Like in the Lashon, Ikar B'rishon, Ikar B'shein. He's talking about Ikar B'rishon because you did a mistake, or because you did it because you didn't know that it's a leap year. So these things are not so clear in the Gemara. That's why I'm saying the Gemara is a challenge, because in that the discussions, the Rishonim are trying to figure out because there's a big difference of if we're talking about how we view the 2 others. If you're looking at it from a perspective of what's the halacha of the 2 others, or how do we deal with a situation where the year was leaped in middle or at the end of Adar. Like the Rosh's scenario of leaping it during Purim itself, and therefore, if you read the Megillah at night, that's the only scenario that you wouldn't. Basically, the Rosh wants to put it that there is Purim Katan is almost a no day, and the only case that you wouldn't fast or eulogize is if you went into the day of Purim and in mid Purim they decided to leap it, so then just stick it out and don't eulogize that day. Which is a rare scenario at best. Rabbi Shimon, so how do you know that Rabbi Shimon holds that you would have to read the parshas? Because he says all the mitzvahs have to be read again. It's the only thing that doesn't have to be done is the fasting is for both the fasting and eulogy. And the Rosh would say only in the case, I guess, if it was leaped in Purim. Okay, so based on that, we're going to learn this Tosfos. Everyone's going to hold cup with me, and we're going to learn it. Rabbi Lezer ben Rabbi Yossi Sav Alf Mikra Megillah. First of all, just a side note: if this is the same Rabbi Yossi, which we'd have to assume it is, it's interesting that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi, has a totally different opinion, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel quotes his father as his opinion. All right. Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi said, "Af mikra Megillah." That what's af mikra Megillah? Lechatchila berishon. Again, this is a brackets, meaning to say it's not just, we don't know clearly if that's the opinion of Rabbi, if it's lechatchila or not. Lechatchila berishon v'nira the dayik mididiktani. How do we know this? So he knows it mididiktani, but Mishnah Yisrael should call mitzvah sheneheges b'sheni neheges berishon demashma lechatchila. Based on Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi, there are those who have the opinion. So Tosfos is the first one bringing it up that you should do simcha on the first Purim, because according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi, it's the primary Purim. It's the Chatchila. This is the Purim you're supposed to celebrate when you have 2 months, even if it's slept in Tishrei. And therefore you would have to celebrate even on the first Purim, even though the halacha is not according to Rabbi Yossi. So he says, based on that, those who have the custom, because from our Mishnah also you could say that. Because our Mishnah says that the only things that we have to do in the second Adar is the reading of the Megillah and gifts to the poor. And we see, as we learned before, that gifts to the poor are usually hand in hand with the reading of the Megillah, because that's when the poor know that they could find the Jewish people in the shul, is when they go to the Megillah. So they go to shul, collect money. So we want to make sure that they should get money when people are around, not that I have to gift the poor but no one's around. So everyone's at the Purim Suda and the doors are closed. So they know that they could go to shul. So therefore the Chacham made gift when you read. Okay, so he says over here, so the fact that the Mishnah only mentions Megillah Matanos Avyonim is mashma that there's a basis for celebrating Purim in the first month. So you would also think, again, it depends how you understand the Mishnah. If the Mishnah is talking about that you celebrated the first Purim, and then you went into the second Purim after they leaped the year, so that's not a basis today that we have a calendar to say that you have to have a Suda. Our Mishnah, we can learn our Mishnah to say that our Mishnah is talking about in the case where we don't know the first Adar is going to be the first of 2. We thought that's the only Adar. So then you have to read the Megillah again. But if you have a calendar and you know, or they leaped it before, so who says that you have to have a Suda before? There's no basis for that. So the Tosfos says there are those who say no, that the fact that the Mishnah says only the Megillah and Matanos Avyonim means to say that not only in the case where you didn't know, even Lechatchila, do everything Purim besides the Megillah and Matanos Avyonim has to be done the second month. The first month you have to do Suda. But Tosfos says no, that's not halacha. So when we say no, because at the end by Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, similarly he's the halacha. We say the only things that again, this is challenging because the Rosh doesn't even learn that's the Tosfos. But the Tosfos learns that when Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says that both months you can't eulogize and fast, means to say Yechatchila shouldn't eulogize and fast, even if you know that there's 2 months. And the fact that it only mentions eulogy and fasting, which today we express also in Tachnun, means to say that there's no obligation to have a meal in the first Purim, which is what the halacha and the Shulchan Aruch finishes off with. We call the Mishnah of Simcha Leka. The eat lashmin in the Mishnah of Simcha. No, the Nesser Hesped, the Hayam Megillas Tanis, Mishnah of Simcha. And he also says that you can't say that the reason why we have to eat meals, we have to be festive in the first Adar is because the reason why we don't eulogize and fast is because it's a day of Simcha. The Simcha is what establishes it as a day that we wouldn't eulogize and fast and say Tachnun. So it's not true, because when the Megillah's timeless mentions days that you can't fast and eulogize, there's no obligation. It's not because that's a day of Simcha. So we see clearly that the criteria of being a day that you don't eulogize or fast is not because it's a day of festivities. It could be a day that we just don't eulogize and fast, where there's no mitzvah to have a Suda. So you can't say that the Suda that the fact that there's no eulogy is a sign that you have to have a Suda. So the Tosfos paskins, the person wants, and this is applicable to today, that there is no halacha to have a Suda of on Purim Katan, on the first Purim, and that's how the Tosfos brings the halacha. That's how I want to learn this Tosfos. Again, the Ramah, Shulchan Aruch finishes off, though there's difference of opinions, because those opinions say that you do have to, and the Tosfos himself quotes it. Nevertheless, the Ramah says, Tov Lev Mishtatamid, if you want to be a good-hearted person, or a person that has a Tov Lev, that Tov Lev, the sign of that person who's always looking for an opportunity to have a festivity. So this is a good day to do it. And that's, I think, the halacha, the people, that's the minhag that we do celebrate in some sort of way. We don't have the same Suda like we would have, let's say, in a regular Purim, but there is an idea of celebrating it more with Simcha and Suda. Now, the question is, we have three opinions. Seemingly, if we read the three opinions of the Tanakama, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the closest thing that we would have to our Mishnah would either be the Tanakama, and we would say, or Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, right? So the question is, who's our Mishnah? Mani, Tanakama. He says, no, you can't say Tanakama. Why? Because our Mishnah adds Matanas Tavyonim, and the Tanakama only says Megillah. So our Mishnah is not according to the Tanakama. Because our Mishnah says it says two things you have to do in the second Purim, and the Tanakama says only to read in the Megillah. If Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi Kashin Ami make a Megillah, Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi says you don't have to do anything on the second Purim. The Chatchila, according to most opinions, how do you understand Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi is that Purim says the primary month is the first month, so that's obviously not our Mishnah. If Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Kashin say the parshas. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that you have to read the parshas again. And our Gemara started off saying that both months are equal, the Shavin, right? Lini parshas zev is a Shavin. Although the Mishnah itself doesn't say that. But that's what the Gemara understands from the Mishnah. So therefore, if the Gemara understands it from the Mishnah, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that you do have to repeat the parshas again, so then our Mishnah is not according to any opinion. So hold on, where was I? Okay. La'olam says no. Mishnah is the Tanakama, is the first opinion in the Brisa. That whenever you have Megillah, you have Matanas Tavyonim. He doesn't have to mention it, it's obvious. The question usually, the rule is in a Brisa versus a Mishnah, the Mishnah is usually less detailed than the Brisa. Here, the Brisa would be less detailed than the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah mentions clearly Matanas Tavyonim. The Brisa doesn't mention it because it says it's obvious. Whenever you have reading the Megillah, we have gifts to the poor, because gifts to the poor are always around Megillah. They go together. So then we can say our Mishnah goes according to Tanakama, and doesn't go according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, because Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says you would have to repeat the four parshas, the four readings. V'yibay Sam, another answer is no. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, that our Mishnah goes according to this third opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel the Nasi. There's just missing words. This is how you have to word the Mishnah. There is no difference between the first two Adars, meaning the first two Purims, aside from the reading of the Megillah and the gifts. But that we're not mentioning anything about the parashas, we're just talking about Hefsid. And Hesped and Tainus, which Rabbi Shimon Gamliel also agrees, are kept in both. The reason, it seems like from this answer of the Gemara, the reason why our Gemara's first statement, before we even get into the conversation, is that the two others are equal when it comes to reading the four portions. Hold on, Aaron. Reading the four portions is because there's something, the language of the Mishnah is obviously missing something. That they're saying that the only difference is this, but we are the equal. So they're equal. We could have said they're equal in other halachas, but the Tosfos says there's no mocker. So we are the equal in the four parshas. So he says no. We could just say they're equal in eulogies and fasting, and our Mishnah is not dealing with the four parshas, and therefore our Mishnah goes according to our Mishnah and Gamliel is also not dealing with the four parshas. Mastis and halachic Tani v'lei. I even say the parshas 12. I'm not talking about the four parshas. Yes, sir.
Why do they not bring up the drinking?
Well, drinking would go with festivities. First of all, it's a very good question. There's a few things that are not so clear in this whole Gemara. One is that we want to just differentiate between the opinions. Why don't we differentiate the opinions also about the idea that there's that the difference between Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Tanakam is also about matanis lavyonim. Why don't we mention it? Why don't we only mention it later? But when we say drinking is going with festivities. And the Tosfos brings it up as a question. He says, because there are those who say, you're right, that fasting is connected to drinking and festivities. But Tosfos says, no, that's not because we have other days of the year that you're not allowed to fast and eulogize, and you don't have to have, it's not a day that you necessarily have to have a meal. So you can't say that the meal is the indication, is the reason why you can't fast and celebrate. But it's a good question. The halacha again is also doubt, because of the Tosfos and the different opinions. Like I said, the Ramah says Tavlev Mishnatam. Okay. So what's the halacha? Like I said, is according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel in the name of Rabbi Yossi, which is, to finalize it, what we know so far, is that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that he also means you have to do Matanas Lavyonim. You have to do, the only thing that we do in the first Purim would be the eulogy and fasting, which is the halacha. That's why we don't say takna. The parashas have to be read in the second, even if you read it by mistake in the first, or because you didn't know we didn't leap the year yet. Sorry, and that would be the opinion basically of the Mishnah as well, according to the Ibay Sema. Yochanan continues. Both our Mishnah or Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi ben Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi have the same verse. Now, so from this Gemara going forward, it seems clearly that the Gemara is taking on the opinion that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi is lechatchila, means what is the primary month? How do you know what the primary month is? You have two others. Who's to decide that the second other is more important than the first other? Maybe the first other is the main other, and the second other is just a secondary. Therefore, we celebrate Purim in the first other. So both the Mishnah, which is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi have one verse to support their opinion. It says, B'chol Shana v'Shana, every year, right? What's Megillah say? 9:21. Let's see if we could get this, bring it up here, because this pasuk is going to come up a few times. So in 21 it says, this is the main chapter that deals with the laws of Purim. That every year you should do it the same way on the date of the 15th and the 14th. The argument is to use that verse in the leap year. Just like every year, the Purim is celebrated following the month of Shvat. Therefore, the primary month is the Adar that follows Shvat. And the secondary Adar is just extra, because we have to go consistent. Call Shana v'Shana. We have a verse that says every single year has to be the same. And the same is that we go Shvat Adar. We go Tu B'Shvat to Purim. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel also has the verse. Says, who says that's the meaning of the verse? Maybe B'chol Shana v'Shana means Kol Shana v'Shana Adar Samach LaNisan. The Adar that's closest to the next month, which is Nisan. Afkan Adar Samach Nisan, just like every year. It's the month before Pesach, before Nisan. So too, even in the year, you do the month before Pesach. Okay, so they both can both use the verse to support their opinion. So the Gemara now is going to go into, so obviously, so if you have a verse that could go both ways, so the verse doesn't help us really, because it could go both ways. So then what do we have to figure out? We have to figure out the reasoning of why we should use the verse one way or the next. So Bishlam Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi mistaber time madei mavir nal mitzvahs. So Rabbi Yossi ben Eliezer said, I'll tell you why we go with my meaning of B'kol Shana v'Shana each year. Because if you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, do it right away. And now you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah in the first Adar, that should be right away, because you're not supposed to pass over a mitzvah. Now we're waiting another whole month for Purim. Rabbi Shimon my time. So what's the reason of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? Rabbi Lezer Yossi makes no sense. As soon as we hit an opportunity to do mitzvah, do it. This idea of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs again is very complicated. That's what I'm saying. A lot of these Gemaras are complicated. Because it's not the rule of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. It's not the classic rule. Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs means that you can't move from one mitzvah to the next. That Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs doesn't mean you can't delay a mitzvah. It's not the same thing. Delaying a mitzvah is not the same as passing over a mitzvah. Passing over a mitzvah means that you have one mitzvah, and you say, no, I don't want to do that mitzvah, I want to do another mitzvah. So I'm passing over. But if you're saying that the primary month is the second month, you're not passing over a mitzvah. The mitzvah didn't come around yet. So that's why, again, this statement that the Gemara is just making blankly, that's Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. Who says this is the rule of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs? So Bishlam Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi Mistaver time with Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. You don't pass over a mitzvah. But what's the reason of Shimon Gamliel? So Rashi says, what's the definition of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs? When you have an opportunity to do mitzvah, actim from the word kadam, you should right away start to do the mitzvah. The halachic time in Machlokim, we have some measures that teaches us ushmartim as a mitzvahs. You should be careful with the mitzvahs. In bas mitzvah, don't get vinegary, don't get spoiled. Don't delay a mitzvah when you have an opportunity, which would be in a case. For instance, what's it used for? Someone comes to you and asks you for tzedakah. Oh, I can do it later. What do you mean? Mitzvah bal yadcha adach mitzana. I'm going to learn later. We use it for, let's say, there's other cases that we use it for. But the mitzvah has to first come to your door. It means it has to be a time for the mitzvah. If Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that we have to be kol shana v'shana means the argue next to Nisan, the mitzvah didn't come yet, didn't happen yet. So how could you say it's Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs? Again, it's not so simple that this is the pshat of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. It's not a case of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. Okay, again, we're going to learn the Tosfos. Hold on a second. Again, all the Mefarshim tackle this question. Why is this a case of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs? Because this is not the classical case. The classical case would be where you have the mitzvah in front of you, but that you have to first establish that the mitzvah is starting now. It's, for instance, let's say a person says, I want to make a bris, a circumcision on the 7th day. It's not the time for the mitzvah. You do it on the 8th day. You're not allowed to do it on the 7th day. But Misamar time the Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. So the Rav quotes that Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi makes most sense because you don't pass over a mitzvah. Mikan kasha, but first, based on this, so Tosfos, although this is a little going off the grid, but it's a good Tosfos to learn. Mikan kasha lahadam min parak ezim u'kaim in zvachim. We learn in the tractate as Zvachim deals with the sacrifices. Just a quick right. So here, this is the base of Mikdash. On Yom Kippur, this over here, Kuf is the Holy of Holies. This over here is the Heichal, and this over here is the outer courtyard of the Azara of the base of Mikdash. Right. This is where the outer Mizbeach is. On Yom Kippur, they did the services. They slaughtered the animal inside the Heichal, means right outside the Kodesh HaKodashim, and they had to pour the blood afterwards by the Mizbeach outside. The question is, where did they pour it? They're coming out from over here. So that's how I want to show the map. They're coming out. Here's this is west. They're coming from west going towards east. So here's the Mizbeach. They could pour the oil, the blood anywhere. Where do they pour the blood when they come out? So this is again a question of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs, right? So Tosfos says like this. From here's the question: you have left over the blood after you sprayed the blood on Yom Kippur against the Peroches, right? Then they did it by the foundation of the west side of the altar, which is the closest to where we were coming from, the Heichal, the inner chamber. And they say, what's the reason? Because the verse says you're supposed to pour it by the foundation of the Mizbeach, of the outer Mizbeach. Why do you have to say the reason is because we have a verse that says to pour it by the foundation of the Mizbeach? The first corner, the first part of the Mizbeach that you hit, you should pour the blood right away. Why should I go to the eastern part of the Mizbeach? I'm walking across the whole Mizbeach, Never, even if it's 2 steps. And I'm pouring it on the east side of the Mizbeach. If I'm coming from the west side, the first part I hit is the west part of the Mizbeach. So that's to be the first place that I should do the mitzvah, because they have a mitzvah. You don't pass over a mitzvah. When I walked out of the sanctuary, which is on the west side of the Beis Hamikdash, beside the you need the first part of the Mizbeach that I hit is the west side of the Mizbeach. ויש מפרשים לא שייך למאמר הם אוויר המצוות אלא איכה שיש לפניו שתי מצוות שיש לעשות קודם עושה דפוגע ברשע וזה איני דהכה לכאלה מצווה אחת. So people want to say no, it's not the same case, because it's only when you have 2 mitzvahs, another mitzvah and this mitzvah. Here there's no 2 mitzvahs. The question is, where do I put it? But there's no 2 mitzvahs. So he says, so he says, you can't see that's the reason. Tosfos again, I'll say thing over here. The people, there's a special, again, we should explain this because it's a nice Tosfos. The Gemara in Zvachim says that there's a special verse to teach us that we have to pour the blood on Yom Kippur on the west side, which is very connected to this week's parsha, right? This is all about this week's parsha. That these are verses in this week's parsha, that when you come out of the Heichal, you come out of the sanctuary where you did the slaughtering, and it's a very unique scenario that we do the slaughtering inside. And we come out with the rest of the blood, we have to pour it by the foundation of the outer Mizbeach. So why do we need that first? We should just say that you have to pour it, we know right away, you have to go to the first space that you should pour it. And that is on the west side. So you say because Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvah. So they say no. That in the case of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs would only apply when you have 2 separate mitzvahs. The question is, which mitzvah do you do? But here it's all one mitzvah. What's the difference if I do it on the west side or the east side? So the Torah says you can't say that, because here also there's only one mitzvah. Either I do either the first month or the second month. There's no second mitzvah. There's no 2 Purims. It's only 1 Purim. The question is, when do I do it? And nevertheless, the Gemara says Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. So what do we see from here? The Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs, the rule of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs is not only applicable when you have 2 options, but you should always do the option right away. So that's just the says So Rabbeinu Huda, the Re says, I think that's the Re, the ilav kra havamina the Ein Mavir Mechatchila hadiyavet shari. The pasuk is coming to teach us leikuf that if that you write Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs, you shouldn't pass over a mitzvah. If you did, you did. The pasuk comes say no, you specifically have to pour it on the west side. Another answer is Mira. And the second answer says it's more important because the west side has a whole side of the west side. How do you know it has to be by the foundation? So the pasuk is coming to teach us it has to be by the foundation. So, but from here we see from Tosfos. The Tosfos understands the Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs is a question. Doesn't mean when you have there's 2 rules that we have. There's Rizim Magdim Al Mitzvah and Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. They're not the same things. Rizim Magdim Al Mitzvah means that, for instance, we use for a bris. We don't say Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs if a person wants to have a bris in the afternoon, right? Let's say you want to do an afternoon circumcision. We say no, it's Rizim Magdim Al Mitzvah. That's why the custom is to try to do the bris if we can in the morning. Why? Because we have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. Try to be bizarre, to be a person who's diligent to do the mitzvah as soon as possible. But that's not passing over the mitzvah. If you wait till the afternoon, that's not Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. It's just that you're not diligent to do it early. That's called Zrizim Magdim Al Mitzvahs. But here the question is, the Torah says, you want to say Zrizim Magdim Al Mitzvahs, that's not enough reason to make it Purim. But Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs, maybe you would. But he says that's not really the typical case of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. But the fact that the Gemara says it means it is. That even if there's no other mitzvah, to do it in its first opportunity means Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvah. So Tosfos is teaching us an amazing thing, that our Gemara, in its just casual language, saying that this is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi, is that's the definition of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. And I'll tell you something else. The very fact that the Gemara doesn't differentiate and say that that's the argument, because then we said Reb Shimon says that's not the definition of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs, means that there's no argument that that's the definition of Ein Mavir Mal Mitzvahs. All right, the Gemara says, so what's the Gemara answer? Reb Tiva says, so the reason Reb Shimon Gamliel is mismach ula legula. This is the famous Rebbe quotes this many times. Adif, that you have 2 choices. You have Ema Vima mitzvahs, we're not supposed to pass over an opportunity for mitzvah. And that would be the scenario over here by waiting till the next month. But we have another thing. The idea is we want to have the two redemptions next to each other. Like Tosfos says, we want to have the Purim should be next to Pesach. And because we want Purim to be next to Pesach, so we better do Purim that's next to Nisan than the Purim that's a month earlier. Because it's better to go from Purim to Pesach. Okay. Mismach Gula. So, like this. Reb Shlomo says, some raise a question. As this is no way relates to whether the sequence of the four Torah portions should be read in the first Adar or the second Adar. What is the reason of the opinion of Shimon ben Gamliel? They explain that no special proof was required since the three of the four portions relate to Passover. Shkalim, because half shekel must be collected before the beginning of Nisan. Para, because one must undergo purification before the festival. And HaChodesh, to inform the people about the festival Passover. So the fact is that the four parshas are also connected to Nisan because they're all about getting ready for Passover. Even Shkalim, which is collecting the coins, is collecting coins so they have money in the coffers so they could buy the sacrifice, so they could get ready for the new year for the sacrifices. Okay. Let's just go a little further. Rabbi Lezer, again, a lot of discussion about this Gemara, about the idea of Altach Mitzena. Tosfos is Rashi's understanding of the clarity of it. Tosfos' understanding of the clarity of it. The difference between Eim Avir Mal Mitzvah and Zrizim Makdim LeMitzvah. There's a lot of discussion. Again, when it comes to halacha l'maisa, these Gemaras have seem simple, but they're not. Rabbi Lezer says, he says the reason is not because Geula has to be next to Geula, redemption next to redemption. But there's another verse. The Kaimas Igeres Apur Mazais Hashenis. So from the word Shenis, it says to confirm the second letter, the second letter of Purim, indicating that there are circumstances when Megillah is read a second time. It's kind of a hint. The pasuk doesn't mean that. The pasuk we learn means something else. It means really that she sent out a second letter to really Esther sent out a second letter. Because she wanted, we're going to see. I thought we would get. I went a little slow today, but I thought we would get further. We see that Esther and Mordechai, especially Esther, the Gemara doesn't actually quote Mordechai in this whole conversation, but Esther was very insisting that her holiday be celebrated, and not that just that the book of Esther be included in the Chumash, in the Tanakh, and she fought the rabbis on that. So she writes another letter. She was not. Esther was not going to take the people not so. I mean, we could say the reason is because Esther really, really understood the miracle. A lot of us, they say today, what's going on today in the wars, if we only really knew. So Esther really knew. She knew how in danger the Jewish people were. She knew her husband. She knew Achashverosh. She knew Haman. She was mamish there, and she really knew. It wasn't an ego trip. She really knew this was a tremendous miracle. And she wasn't going to have the Jewish people kind of lightweight it and say, oh, whatever, okay, whatever, another holiday, it worked out, Achashverosh is inconsistent. He changes his mind 100 times. He's not, he's emotional, there's no miracles involved. Esther says, trust me, there's miracles. And therefore she insisted on making Purim a holiday. But this pasuk is coming to say the circumstance where the Megillah is read a second time. In other words, when the year was incorrected, the Megillah was read in the first Adar. Read in the first Adar, has to be read the second Adar. Okay, let's just stop over here. I think yeah, it's a good. We'll stop over here and we'll continue next week, where we go into more discussions about what Esther wanted to accomplish with Purim and how the rabbis challenged her a bit on it, but at the end she got her way, and she made Purim into a holiday, and she made the Book of Esther into one of the holy books, which was actually a huge accomplishment, because she's the only book that's really she's the latest book. Because even though we have come to some of the prophecies of Treyasar, and we have Zechariah and Malachi, we're also kind of into the second base of Mikdash, but she was her whole story was outside of Eretz Yisrael. All right, everyone. Thank you much for joining, and B'ez Hashem, see you next week. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.